I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from severe exhaustion, when my parents demanded I sign over a portion of my company to fund my sister's boyfriend. When I refused, they tried to seize control behind my back. So I prepared a legal trap that would cost them everything. The steady, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the cardiac monitor was the only thing grounding me to reality. The room was sterile, white, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and floor wax, a smell I had come to associate with failure. Not business failure, but bodily failure. At 32, I had officially worked myself into a state of collapse. My doctor called it severe burnout with cardiac implications, but I knew what it really was: the price of carrying a family that refused to walk on their own. I shifted slightly, the plastic tubing of the IV line tugging at the back of my hand. My body felt heavy, like it was filled with lead, but my mind was racing, worrying about the logistics of the gala I was supposed to be supervising next weekend. My company, Lumina Events, was my life. I had built it from a laptop on a coffee table into the premier logistics firm in the state, handling six-figure weddings and corporate retreats. It was my baby, my shield, and unfortunately, my family's favorite piggy bank. The door creaked open. I expected a nurse, maybe checking my vitals or bringing me one of those sad, gelatinous cups of hospital apple sauce. Instead, my parents, Mason and Amelia, walked in. There were no flowers. There was no get-well-soon balloon. There wasn't even the look of concern you'd expect from parents seeing their daughter hooked up to machines. Mason was clutching a thick, manila envelope, and Amelia was checking her watch, looking agitated, as if my hospitalization was making them late for a dinner reservation. "Sophie," my mother said, her tone clipping the air. She didn't come to the bedside to hold my hand. She stood at the foot of the bed, gripping the plastic rail. "You look pale." "I collapsed, Mom," I rasped, my throat dry. "The doctor said I need rest, complete rest." "Well, we won't keep you long," my father, Mason, said, stepping forward. He placed the envelope on the rolling tray table, pushing aside my untouched water pitcher. "We actually need to discuss something urgent. It can't wait until you're discharged." I stared at the envelope. A cold knot formed in my stomach, tighter than the nausea I'd been fighting for 2 days. "Can't wait? I'm attached to an IV, Dad." "It's about Natalia," Amelia said, her voice dropping to that reverent whisper she always used when talking about my younger sister. "She and Carter have finally found the opportunity. The big one, Sophie, the one that's going to set them up for life." "Carter?" I asked, though I knew exactly who he was. The new boyfriend, the visionary, the leech. They've been dating for 3 months. "He's a genius," Mason insisted, tapping the envelope. "But these things move fast in the tech world. They need liquidity, Sophie, immediately. We've gone over the numbers, and since your assets are, well, substantial and currently sitting idle while you're in here." "Sitting idle?" I tried to sit up, but the room spun. "That's my operating capital. That pays my staff. That pays the vendors." "It's family money, Sophie," Amelia snapped, her patience instantly evaporating. "We all sacrificed for you to build that business. Now it's time to help your sister. We need you to sign authorization for a temporary bridge loan from your business accounts to Carter's startup. Just $50,000. They'll pay it back in a month." I looked at them, really looked at them. They didn't see a daughter in pain. They saw an ATM that was inconveniently out of order. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the room. Mason's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. "Excuse me." "No," I repeated, louder this time, my heart rate monitor picking up speed, beep, beep, beep. "I am not giving Natalia and a man I barely know $50,000 of my company's money. Not while I'm lying here because I worked too hard to earn it." Amelia's expression hardened into ice. She leaned over the rail, her face inches from my feet. "We didn't want to do it this way, Sophie. We hoped you'd be reasonable. But we promised Carter you would invest. We gave him our word." "Then you pay him," I said, closing my eyes. "Get out, please." "You're being selfish," Mason spat, grabbing the envelope. You think you're so superior because you have money? You owe us. We're your parents." They stormed out, leaving me alone in the silence. The monitor was blaring a warning rhythm now, alerting the nurse's station that my heart rate had spiked. But as the nurse rushed in to check on me, I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling over me. The betrayal wasn't that they asked. It was that they had prioritized a stranger's promise over my survival. But the look on my father's face as he left, it wasn't just anger, it was determination, and that was far more terrifying. The following week was a blur of medical advice I mostly ignored and a return to work that felt more like entering a war zone than an office. I checked myself out of the hospital 2 days early, against medical advice, because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My parents hadn't called. No texts, no guilt-tripping voicemails, just radio silence. Silence from Mason and Amelia was never peace. It was tactical. I sat in my office chair, the leather creaking as I leaned back, trying to ignore the lingering dizziness. My office was my sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a massive oak desk covered in vendor contracts, and the faint, comforting hum of the HVAC system. But today, the sanctuary felt compromised. My phone buzzed. It was Natalia. "Hey sis, Mom said you were acting super weird at the hospital. Hope you're feeling better. Carter and I are looking at office spaces downtown today. So excited to show you." I stared at the screen. Office spaces, downtown, commercial real estate in our city was exorbitant. Natalia had been working as a barista part-time while trying to launch her lifestyle brand for the last 3 years. She barely made rent on her studio apartment. Carter, from what I knew, was between exits in the startup world, which usually meant unemployed. How were they looking at offices? I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my medication. I logged into my business banking portal. My fingers trembled slightly over the keyboard. I clicked on the operating account. Everything looked normal, the balance was there, the vendor payments were scheduled. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Maybe I was paranoid, maybe the medication was making me cynical. I clicked over to the Authorized Users tab, just out of habit. My heart stopped. There, pending approval, was a request to add Mason J. Verify Authorized User to the account. It was dated 2 days ago, the day after they visited me in the hospital. I grabbed the phone and called my bank immediately. "This is Sophie, account holder for Lumina Events," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and adrenaline. "I see a pending authorization request on my account. I did not initiate this." "One moment, ma'am," the representative said, the typing on the other end sounding like gunshots. "Ah, yes. We received a notarized power of attorney document claiming you were incapacitated due to medical emergency, signed by Mason and Amelia." "Cancel it," I interrupted, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I am not incapacitated. I am at my desk. Cancel the request and flag the account for fraud. No changes without my voice verification and a PIN code." "Understood, Miss Sophie. I'm locking it down now." I hung up and stared out the window. They had tried to use my hospitalization, my moment of physical weakness, to legally hijack my business. They declared me incapacitated so they could funnel money to Natalia. My stomach churned, but not from sickness this time. It was pure, unadulterated fury. They thought they could bully me. They thought that because I had always been the good daughter, the responsible one who fixed the flat tires and paid for the anniversary dinners, that I would roll over. They thought I was just a checkbook with a pulse. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. It was of the 4 of us from 10 years ago, smiling on a beach vacation I had paid for. I picked it up and placed it face down. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They raised Natalia to be a dreamer, but they forced me to be an operator. I didn't just plan parties. I managed logistics, I negotiated contracts, and I spotted liabilities from a mile away. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to find out exactly what this Carter was really up to and why my parents were willing to commit fraud to please him. To understand why my parents were willing to risk jail time for Natalia, you have to understand the dynamic of our house. Natalia was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting her, hoping for a little warmth. Natalia was beautiful, charismatic, and utterly incapable of finishing anything she started. At 22, it was a fashion line. My parents drained their savings to buy her inventory that ended up rotting in our garage. At 25, it was a curated travel experience blog. I paid for her trips to Bali and Chalum, believing her promise that sponsorships were just around the corner. They never came. I was the foil, the boring one, the one who studied business administration, worked internships, and saved every penny. When I started Lumina, my parents didn't offer seed money, they offered caution. Don't get your hopes up, Sophie. Business is risky. But when I succeeded, suddenly it was our success. We always knew you had it in you, they'd say at dinner parties, taking credit for my work ethic while asking me to cover the check. I had accepted this role. I was the provider. I was the safety net. But I had never been the victim until Carter arrived. I decided I needed to see the enemy up close. I texted Natalia back, feeling much better. Let's do dinner tonight. My treat. Bring Carter. I want to hear about the business. They picked the most expensive steakhouse in the city, of course. When I walked in, they were already seated at a booth. Natalia looked radiant, dressed in a designer blazer I knew she couldn't afford. Beside her sat Carter. He was handsome in a generic, algorithm-generated way. Perfect teeth, expensive haircut, and a suit that looked tailored but slightly too shiny. He didn't stand up when I arrived. He just gestured to the empty seat with a hand adorned by a watch that looked like a Patek Philippe, but didn't catch the light quite right. "Sophie," Natalia squealed, jumping up to hug me. "I'm so glad you're okay. Mom said you were practically on death's door." "I'm fine," I said, sliding into the booth. I looked at Carter. "You must be the genius." Carter smiled, a slow, practiced expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Genius is a strong word, Sophie. I just see patterns others miss. I'm an aggressive disruptor." "Disruptor," I repeated, unfolding my napkin. "And what exactly are you disrupting this time?" "The logistical supply chain for artisan goods," Carter said smoothly, leaning forward. "It's an app-based interface that connects micro-creators directly with high-net-worth consumers, bypassing traditional retail markups. We call it Nexus." It was a word salad. A meaningless string of buzzwords designed to impress people like my parents who didn't know how business actually worked. "And you need $50,000 for?" I asked. "Seed liquidity," Carter said. "Server architecture, initial UI/UX design, and legal retainers. It's actually a very lean entry point. Usually, I wouldn't even open a round for less than $250,000, but Natalia speaks so highly of you. We wanted to give you a chance to get in on the ground floor." He spoke as if he were doing me a favor, as if asking for my money was an act of charity toward me. "I see," I said, taking a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. "And what is your background, Carter, before Nexus?" "I've been in the Valley," he said vaguely, waving his hand. "Consulting, specialized asset management, crypto before the crash." "Which firm?" I pressed. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. "I was independent. Look, Sophie, I know traditional business owners like you get hung up on resumes, but in my world, it's about vision. Mason and Amelia get it. They see the potential. They know that sometimes you have to move capital to make capital." He said my parents' names with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. He had been in their lives for 3 months, and he had them wrapped around his finger. "They certainly seem enthusiastic," I said neutrally. "They visited me in the hospital to tell me about it." "They're excited for Natalia," Carter said, placing a hand on my sister's shoulder. She melted into his touch, looking at him with absolute adoration. "Finally, she has a partner who can match her energy, someone who can take her places." The implication was clear. You couldn't. I looked at Natalia. She looked so happy, so hopeful, and so incredibly stupid. She didn't see the shark sitting next to her. She didn't see that he was ordering the Wagyu beef and a $200 bottle of Cabernet on my tab while talking about lean entry points. "I'll think about it," I lied. "Don't take too long," Carter said, his voice dropping, a hint of steel entering his tone. "The window is closing. Mason said he's moving some assets around to ensure we hit our launch date. I'd hate for you to miss the boat." Mason said he's moving some assets around. The food arrived, but I had lost my appetite. My father wasn't just trying to access my accounts, he was liquidating his own scant resources. Or worse, he was still trying to find a backdoor into mine. Carter smiled at me, slicing into his steak. It was a predator's smile. He thought he had won. He thought I was just the sister with the checkbook, the skepticism, and the eventual surrender. He had no idea that while he was eating my steak, I was memorizing the face of the man I was going to destroy. The morning after the steakhouse dinner, I didn't go to the office. Instead, I drove to a nondescript brick building in the industrial district, far away from the polished glass and steel of my usual world. This was the office of Marcus, a forensic accountant and private investigator I had used twice before, once to vet a vendor who turned out to be a shell company, and once to help a client going through a messy, high-asset divorce. I sat across from him, the leather chair cold against my back. I felt like a traitor. Investigating a vendor was business. Investigating my sister's boyfriend felt like a violation of an unspoken social contract. But then I remembered the power of attorney form my father had tried to slip past the bank. That contract had already been broken. "So," Marcus said, leaning back and tenting his fingers. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. "You want to know about Carter, last name?" "He goes by Carter Vance," I said, handing over the business card Carter had slid across the table the night before. It was heavy stock, matte black with gold lettering. Impressive to the untrained eye, but I noticed there was no physical address, just a QR code and a generic email. "Claims to be a disruptor in the supply chain tech space. Says he's from the Valley." Marcus took the card, his eyes scanning it with professional boredom. "And the objective?" "My parents are about to liquidate their retirement and leverage my business to fund him," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I need to know if he's legit. If he is, I'll apologize and write them a check. If he's not, I need ammunition." "I'll start digging," Marcus said. "Standard retainer, give me 48 hours. "I might not have 48 hours, I replied. "They tried to access my accounts 3 days ago. They're desperate." 24 then, but it'll cost you double." "Done." I left his office and immediately went into defense mode. I spent the rest of the day with my corporate attorney, restructuring the ownership of Lumina Events. We moved the operating capital into a secured trust that required 3 signatures for any withdrawal over $5,000. Mine, my lawyer, S, and an independent trustee, S. It was a bureaucratic nightmare that would slow down my own operations, but it was the only way to ensure Mason couldn't talk his way into a withdrawal slip. I also sent a mass email to my entire client list, a security update, ostensibly about phishing scams, but really a preemptive strike. "Please note that all financial communications will come solely from my encrypted email address. No family members or associates are authorized to discuss billing." It felt dirty. It felt necessary. That night I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights. My phone buzzed incessantly, texts from my mother. "Sophie, why did the bank call Dad about a frozen access attempt? Sophie, we need to sign the papers for Carter tomorrow. Don't be difficult. We are family. Stop acting like a stranger." I didn't reply. I poured a glass of wine and waited. At 11:43 p.m., my secure email pinged. It was Marcus. The subject line was just a file number. I opened the attachment. The first page wasn't a financial report, it was a mugshot. The man in the photo looked younger, rougher, and lacked the expensive haircut, but it was him. It was Carter. But the name under the booking number wasn't Carter Vance. It was Kevin Miller. I scrolled down, my breath hitching in my throat. Fraud, larceny, identity theft. The charges were from 3 different states. But the real horror wasn't the criminal record. It was the pattern. Marcus had included a timeline of his businesses. 2018, solar energy startup, Nevada. Investors lost $400K. $2,020. Crypto exchange platform, Florida. Investors lost 1.2 M. $2,022. Artisan coffee franchise, Austin. Investors lost $600K. In every single case, he targeted a specific demographic. Families with one ambitious but unsuccessful child, using them as the anchor to drain the parents' assets. He wasn't just a failure. He was a predator who specialized in family dynamics. He knew exactly which buttons to push. I looked at the timestamps. He moved every 18 months. He had been with Natalia for 3. He was just getting started. I knew I couldn't just email this to them. They would claim it was fake or that I had photoshopped it out of jealousy. I had to look them in the eye. I had to gauge their reaction to see how deep the brainwashing went. I drove to my parents' house the next evening. It was a modest, 2-story colonial that they had paid off years ago, their only real asset besides their retirement accounts. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw a brand new Range Rover parked next to my dad's 10-year-old sedan. It still had the dealer plates. My stomach dropped. I let myself in. The house smelled of expensive cologne and anxiety. They were all in the dining room: Mason, Emilia, Natalia, and Carter. The table was covered in papers, blueprints, contracts, glossy mock-ups of an app interface. The conversation stopped dead when I walked in. "Sophie," my mother said, standing up. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, but there was a frantic energy about her. "We were just finalizing some things." "I bet you were," I said, walking to the table. I didn't sit. I stood at the head, looming over them. "Is that a new car in the driveway, Natalia?" Natalia beamed, oblivious to the tension. "Isn't it amazing? Carter leased it for the company. He says we need to project success to attract success. It's a tax write-off." "A lease," I repeated. "In whose name?" "Well, mine, technically," Natalia said, her smile faltering slightly. "Since Carter's credit is tied up in overseas investments right now." I looked at Carter. He was leaning back in my father's chair, swirling a glass of my father's scotch. He looked bored. "Overseas investments," I said, my voice dripping with acid. "Is that what they call outstanding warrants in Nevada these days, Kevin?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. Carter didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He just took a slow sip of his drink and set the glass down. "I wondered how long it would take you to dig that up. You're efficient. I like that." "Kevin," my father asked, looking between us. "Sophie, what are you talking about?" "His name is Kevin Miller," I said, throwing the manila folder onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and hit the Scotch glass with a thud. "He isn't a tech visionary. He is a convicted fraudster who served 18 months in Arizona for selling fake solar panels to retirees. He has 3 bankruptcies and a trail of families who lost their homes." My mother picked up the folder. Her hands were shaking. She opened it, staring at the mugshot. "That's," she whispered. "A mistake," Carter interrupted smoothly. He stood up, not aggressively, but with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times. "A youthful indiscretion. I was 22, Mason. I was hungry and I made bad choices. I trusted the wrong partners. I changed my name to distance myself from that past so I could build something real. I told Natalia everything." I whipped my head toward my sister. "He told you." Natalia looked down at her hands. "He said he had a rough past. He said people judged him for mistakes he made when he was a kid. He's changed, Sophie. He's brilliant now." "He's playing you," I shouted, losing my composure. "He leased a Range Rover in your name because he can't sign a contract. He's using you to get to Mom and Dad's equity." "That is enough," Mason slammed his hand on the table. He stood up, his face purple. You come into my house, you insult our guest, you attack your sister. And for what? Because you can't stand that she might actually succeed without your help. I stared at him, stunned. Dad, look at the mugshot, look at the dates. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mason said, though his voice wavered. Carter explained the legal issues to us. It was a misunderstanding with the SEC. He was targeted because he was disrupting the industry. He told you, I asked, looking at my mother, and you believed him. He was honest with us, Amelia said, closing the folder and pushing it away as if it were radioactive. Unlike you, Sophie, you didn't tell us you locked the bank accounts. We tried to transfer the initial investment this morning, and it was declined. Do you know how embarrassing that was? I locked them because you tried to steal from me. It's not stealing if it's family, Natalia screamed, standing up now, tears streaming down her face. You have so much, Sophie. You have the business, the apartment, the clothes. Why can't you just let me have this one thing? Why do you have to ruin everything? Carter walked over to Natalia and wrapped his arms around her, looking at me over her shoulder. His eyes were cold, dead sharks. He smirked, just a tiny, imperceptible twitch of his lips. Maybe Sophie is right, Carter said softly, his voice filled with fake humility. Maybe I am just a risk. I shouldn't ask you to leverage the house. It's too much pressure. We should call off the launch. No, Natalia grabbed his lapels. No, Carter, we are not stopping. Mom, Dad, tell him. We are not stopping, Mason said, glaring at me. Sophie, if you aren't going to help, then leave. But do not try to sabotage your sister. I mean it. I looked at them, my father puffed up with false pride. My mother, terrified of Natalia's tears. My sister, clutching the man who was going to drown her. Fine, I said, my voice trembling. But when he clears you out, and he will, don't come to me. I turned and walked out. I expected to feel triumphant that I had exposed him. Instead, I felt a hollow pit in my stomach. I hadn't stopped him. I had just accelerated his timeline. The next 3 days were a nightmare of silence. My parents blocked my number. Natalia blocked me on social media. I was completely cut off from the house I grew up in. But I wasn't idle. I went back to Marcus. They didn't buy it, I told him, pacing in his office. He spun it. He admitted to the past before I could expose it, made it look like he was a victim of the system. Classic inocula. Tian technique, Marcus said, not looking up from his computer. He tells them a watered-down version of the truth so that when the real truth comes out, it looks like old news. Smart guy. I need more, I said. I need something he can't spin. A mugshot isn't enough. I need a body. Figuratively, I hope, Marcus muttered. Well, you're in luck. I found his partners from the Austin Coffee franchise scam. A couple named the Hendersons. They didn't just lose their money. They lost their custody rights for a while because Carter used their home address for a drug distribution front he was running on the side. Drugs, I blinked. He's dealing. Not anymore, but he used their basement to store inventory for a friend. When the raid happened, he was gone. They took the fall. They're eager to talk. Get me a sworn affidavit, I said. Video testimony if possible. I'm already on it, but Sophie, there's something else. Marcus turned his screen toward me. I've been monitoring your parents' credit inquiries. It's illegal for me to hack their accounts, but public records show activity. He pointed to a line on the screen. County clerk deed recording pending. What is that? I asked, leaning in. It's a lien, Marcus said grimly. A hard money loan, high interest, short term, secured against their property. It was filed yesterday. How much? $300,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. My parents' house was worth maybe $450,000. If they defaulted on a hard money loan, which usually carried interest rates of 12% to 15%, they would lose the house in 6 months. He's cashing out, I whispered. He knows I'm onto him. He's skipping the business building phase and going straight to the liquidation. There's a launch party this Saturday, Marcus said, pulling up a digital invitation he had scraped from Natalia's Instagram before she blocked me. Nexus, the future of retail. Hosted at the Grand Oak Hotel Ballroom. I stared at the invitation. It was flashy, expensive, and completely fraudulent. That's where he's going to announce the funding, I realized. He needs to show the other investors, probably other victims he's grooming, that he has capital. He's using my parents as social proof. If you go there, it's going to be a scene, Marcus warned. Security will be tight. I don't care about the scene, I said, grabbing my purse. I care about the check. If that loan money hits his account, it's gone. It'll be in a Cayman shell company before Monday morning. I looked at the date, Saturday, 2 days away. Get me the Henderson video, I said, my voice hard. And get me everything you have on his current business partner, this guy listed on the LLC. What are you going to do? I'm an event planner, Marcus, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I know exactly how to crash a party, and I know exactly how to ruin one. I walked out of his office with a plan forming in my mind. It was risky. It was public. It would likely destroy my relationship with my family forever. But they had already chosen a stranger over me. Now, I wasn't fighting for their love anymore. I was fighting for their survival, whether they wanted me to or not. I drove past my parents' house one last time that night. The lights were on. I could see shadows moving in the living room. They were probably celebrating, toasting to the future, toasting to the big break. They had no idea that I was bringing the wrecking ball. And this time, I wasn't going to ask for permission to swing it. The Grand Oak Hotel Ballroom was bathed in a wash of cool, blue light, future blue, as the event branding called it. It was a space I knew intimately. I had organized a charity gala here just 3 months ago. I knew the acoustics, the load-in zones, and most importantly, I knew the staff. I walked through the service entrance wearing a black headset I had kept from a previous job and a clipboard I pulled from my car. The security guard at the back, a burly man named Mike who I'd hired for half a dozen events, nodded at me without blinking. "Running late, Sophie?" he asked, assuming I was the planner of record. "You know how it is, Mike," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Last-minute crisis management." "Go get him." I slipped into the ballroom shadows. The room was fuller than I expected, populated by a mix of local business owners, curious onlookers, and a few influencers. Carter had likely paid to be there. In the front row, sitting at a reserved round table, were my parents and Natalia. They looked like royalty from a distance. Mason was in his tuxedo, looking proud but stiff. Emilia was beaming, clutching a glass of champagne. Natalia looked stunning in a silver gown, but even from the back of the room, I could see her leg bouncing nervously under the table. On stage, Kevin was in his element. He wore a black turtleneck and jeans, channeling a discount Steve Jobs. A massive screen behind him displayed the Nexus logo. "Disruption isn't comfortable," Carter was saying, his voice amplified and smooth. He paced the stage, making eye contact with the audience. "Change is scary. When I started this journey, people told me I was dreaming. They told me the logistics were impossible, but I found partners who believed, partners who saw the vision." He gestured dramatically toward my family. "Mason and Emilia," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent hush. "They put their home on the line because they believe in the future. They believe in us." The crowd applauded politely. I saw my father puff out his chest. He had no idea he was being applauded for signing his own death warrant. I moved toward the AV booth at the back of the room. The technician, a kid named Dave D worked with for years, looked up, surprised. "Sophie, I thought this was a Vivid Events gig." "It is," I whispered, sliding a USB drive onto his console. "But they're running a corrupt file for the testimonial video. Carter asked me to bring the backup manually. He wants to swap it. Now." It was a lie, but in the high-stress world of live events, technicians didn't question a confident producer with a solution. Dave shrugged. "You got it. swapping input too, queuing for the testimonial segment. I stepped back, my hands trembling. This was it. On stage, Carter smiled. But you don't have to take my word for it. We have testimonials from our beta partners. Let's watch. He pointed to the screen, the lights dimmed, the crowd hushed. Carter turned his back to the audience to watch his triumph. The screen flickered. But instead of a slickly produced promo for Nexus, a grainy, shaky video appeared. It was shot in a living room that looked stripped bare. A man and a woman, the Hendersons, sat on a couch, looking haggard and broken. The audio crackled through the massive ballroom speakers. "If you are watching this," the man on the screen said, his voice hollow, "then Kevin Miller or Carter Vance or whatever he calls himself now is in your town." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Carter froze. He stood perfectly still on stage, his silhouette rigid against the massive projection of his past victims. "He calls himself a visionary," the woman on the screen sobbed. "He took our retirement. He used our basement to store stolen goods. We lost custody of our kids for 6 months because of him. He is a predator." The room went dead silent, the kind of silence where you can hear a pin drop. "Turn it off," Carter screamed, his voice cracking, the smooth facade shattering instantly. He waved frantically at the booth. Technical glitch cut the feed. Dave, confused, looked at me. I shook my head. He kept his hands off the board. The screen changed. It was the mugshot. Kevin Miller. Charges: grand larceny, fraud, identity theft. Then, the coup de grace. A video I had received just hours ago from Marcus. It was security footage from a pawn shop in Nevada, time-stamped 3 days ago. It showed Carter pawning a diamond tennis bracelet. My mother's diamond tennis bracelet, the one she thought was safe in her jewelry box. "That's Mom's," Natalia screamed. Her voice cut through the silence like a knife. She stood up, her chair clattering backward onto the floor. "That's my mother's bracelet. You said you sent it to be cleaned." Carter looked at the crowd, sweat glistening on his forehead. "This is a deep fake. This is AI generated. My competitors are trying to sabotage the launch." I stepped out of the shadows. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking loudly on the parquet floor. Every head turned toward me. "It's not AI, Kevin," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. Carter's eyes locked onto me. If looks could kill, I would have evaporated on the spot. "You," he snarled. "Security, remove this woman. She's a disgruntled family member." Mike, the security guard, stepped forward from the back. But he didn't walk toward me. He walked toward the stage. "Sophie," my father stammered, standing up. He looked pale, like all the blood had been drained from his body. What is this?" "He pawned Mom's bracelet to pay for the catering, Dad," I said, not taking my eyes off Carter. "And the lien on your house? The $300,000. That money isn't in a business account. It was transferred this morning to an offshore holding company in the Caymans. Marcus traced it." "Liar!" Carter lunged for the laptop on the podium, trying to kill the feed himself. "The police are outside," I said calmly. "They have the affidavit from the Hendersons. They have the wire transfer records." Carter stopped. He looked at the exit signs. He looked at the crowd, which was now murmuring with hostility. He looked at Natalia, who was standing there, shaking, tears streaming down her face, looking at a stranger in a tuxedo. "You bic asterisk," Carter hissed, "poi." Enting a trembling finger at me. "You jealous, miserable bic asterisk. You couldn't stand that she was going to be better than you." "She is better than me," I said softly. "That's why she deserves better than a con artist." Then the doors burst open. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a suit walked in. "Kevin Miller," the detective called out. The chase didn't happen. There was no dramatic fight. Kevin simply slumped. The air went out of him. He raised his hands, his face twisting into a sneer of pure, unfiltered hatred. As they handcuffed him on stage, in front of the future blue lighting, the investors he had been grooming began to shout. The illusion was broken. I didn't watch him get dragged away. I walked to the front table. My mother was slumped in her chair, clutching her chest. My father was staring at his hands. Natalia was standing alone, looking at the empty space where her boyfriend had been. "Sophie," Natalia whispered, her voice barely audible. He said he loved me." I reached out and took her hand. It was ice cold. "I know, Tal, I know." My father looked up at me. His eyes were wet. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the authority figure. I didn't see the judge. I saw an old, foolish man who had lost everything because of his vanity. "The house," he croaked. "Sophie, the house." "I know," I said. "We have a lot of work to do." The fallout was messy. It wasn't wrapped up in an hour. It took months. We spent the night at the police station giving statements. My parents were humiliated. The local news picked up the story. Tech disruptor arrested at gala, millions in fraud exposed. My parents' names weren't in the headline, but everyone in our social circle knew. The days that followed were a blur of lawyers and forensic accountants. Because I had acted when I did, we managed to freeze the offshore transfer before it fully cleared. It took 6 weeks of legal battling, but we got the bulk of the loan money back. The interest penalties, however, were steep. I sat in my parents' living room 3 months later. The Nexus prototypes were in the recycling bin. The Range Rover had been repossessed the day after the arrest. "We have a plan," I said, placing a spreadsheet on the coffee table. The dynamic had shifted permanently. I wasn't the daughter asking for permission anymore. I was the CEO managing a failing subsidiary. "We use the recovered funds to pay off the principal of the hard money loan immediately. You will have to pay the early termination fees and the interest out of your retirement savings. It's going to hurt. You won't be going on cruises for a few years, but you keep the house." Mason picked up the paper. His hands shook slightly. He looked older now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a permanent fragility. "Thank you, Sophie," he said quietly. He didn't argue, he didn't negotiate. We were so foolish. "Yes," I said, "you were." I didn't sugarcoat it, I couldn't. "And Natalia?" Emilia asked, looking toward the kitchen where my sister was making tea. Natalia had moved back home. She was quiet these days. She had deleted her social media. She was working shifts at my warehouse, counting inventory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real work. "Natalia is going to keep working for me," I said. "She's learning the logistics side. She's good at it, actually, when she focuses. But she's not a partner. She's an employee. She earns a wage. She learns the value of a dollar that isn't given to her." My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "We failed her, didn't we, by giving her everything?" "You tried to protect her from the world," I said, standing up. "But the world is heavy. You have to let her carry her own weight." I walked into the kitchen. Natalia was waiting for the kettle to boil. She looked tired, stripped of her makeup and her pretensions. "Hey," she said, handing me a mug. "Hey." "Dad says we're keeping the house," she said, looking down at the counter. "Barely." Natalia turned to me. "I hated you that night, you know, when you walked down the aisle. I wanted you to die." "I know." "But when I saw the video of that couple, the Hendersons," she shuddered, "he was going to do that to us. He was going to leave Mom and Dad with nothing." "Yes, he was." "Why did you do it?" she asked, looking me in the eye. "After everything we said to you, after we tried to take your money." I looked at her, my little sister. I remembered teaching her to tie her shoes. I remembered her bringing me soup when I had the flu in college. I remembered the years before the resentment, before the business, before Carter. "Because you're my sister," I said simply, "and because I could." She started to cry, and for the first time in years, I hugged her. It wasn't a perfect hug. There was still tension, still history, still scars that would take years to fade, but it was real. I left the house an hour later. I drove back to my apartment, to my quiet sanctuary. I poured myself a glass of wine and walked to the window. My phone buzzed, a text from Mason. "We are proud of you, Sophie, not for what you have, but for who you are." I stared at the screen. It was the text I had waited 32 years to receive. It shouldn't have taken a catastrophe to get it, but life rarely gives us the easy path. I put the phone down and looked at the city lights. I was exhausted. I was drained. My bank account was lighter from the legal fees I had covered, but as I took a sip of wine, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt safe. I had built a fortress, not just of money, but of competence. I had faced a predator and won. I had saved my family from themselves. And tomorrow I had a gala to plan.